So Psalm 78, verse 9 left a question: can God spread a table for us in the wilderness? Can he provide for us when we're hungry? And chapter 16, we got the answer to that question. Yes, God can provide abundantly. And that's what we're going to hear about this morning. So the title of the message is, What's This? In Hebrew, how do you think you can say, what's this? Manna. Manna is simply a Hebrew word which means, what is it? And so that became the name for this bread which came down from heaven, manna. So that's the title, What's This? Brothers and sisters in our Lord Jesus Christ, when I listen to the words that Jesus spoke in chapter 6, John chapter 6, it's understandable that some people took very serious reaction to what he said, because Jesus said in John 6, in the latter part of the chapter, he said, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. Those seem like pretty strange words, don't you think? When the people that Jesus was teaching at that time, when the people heard Jesus say these things, they said, what is this? This is a hard thing for us to accept. And as a result, a lot of people stopped following Jesus. These were called his common disciples. Jesus had many, many disciples. And so we read in John 6, many of his disciples no longer went about with Jesus. And then Jesus turned toward his own disciples, the 12, so his hand-picked, his select disciples. He turned towards his own disciples and he said, do you take offense to my words too, when I said, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you? Do you take offense to these words too? Will you turn away from me as well? Peter said, Lord, to whom shall we turn? For you have the words of eternal life. Peter's answer is awesome. I will follow you, Jesus, even though you say such things that are hard to accept and difficult to understand. I sympathize with the difficulty which people had. I think that we all find that a bit hard to accept. I need to eat his flesh. I need to drink his blood. But when I turn to Exodus chapter 16 and I read the account of the giving of manna from heaven, and when I think about Exodus 16 in light of the whole teaching of John 6, then I understand that what Jesus is saying is not offensive, but it's actually very beautiful. Because in John 6, the beginning of the chapter describes how Jesus fed 4,000 people with only a small amount of food, just a little bit of food. He kept on breaking pieces off of it, and he fed thousands of people. Jesus is capable of feeding our stomachs with only a little bit of bread. And Jesus said, but that's not what's important, is that I fed you food for your stomachs. Of course, it is important in the sense that we need to have food. Jesus recognized that, so it's important. But Jesus said that's not the important thing. Much more important is, I am the bread which comes down from heaven. And we need to eat it, the manna from heaven. Not the bread described in Isaiah in Exodus 16, but Jesus. So when Jesus says, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, I think he's saying something actually absolutely wonderful. And we need to grab a hold of that and say, yes, that is totally true for me. And I love it that Jesus says this. And I will say with Peter, Lord, to whom shall I turn? You have the words of eternal life. You are eternal life. And I hope that we all can see that this morning. In our passage, we read about how Israel woke up one morning and they looked outside and they saw that the ground was covered with what looked like fine frost, flakes, and that looked like coriander seed. And when they ate it, it tasted like wafers baked in honey. Doesn't that sound delicious? Wafers baked in honey. And when they saw it, they said, manna. That's Hebrew for, what is this? They said, what is it? And so I want to answer that question this morning with three points. The question is, what is it? And the answer is, it's food for the stomach. It's a sign by which God says, I love you. And thirdly, it is the promise for bread which is infinitely better. So, what is it? It's food for the stomach. It's a sign from God which says, I love you. And thirdly, it is a promise for bread infinitely better than the manna scattered on the ground. So, what is it? It's bread for the stomach. God has been giving Israel many opportunities to grow in faith and to trust in God and to become resilient so that when trouble comes, they would believe in God. So God has proven that he can be relied on. He delivered his people out of Egypt. He set them free from slavery, just as he promised in the beginning of the book of Exodus. God took care of his people. He liberated them. Then he destroyed his enemy in the Red Sea, drowning Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea under the water, so that Israel was completely liberated from the hatred and the cruelty of Pharaoh. They no longer had any more fear. And then, after they were traveling for 3 days and they ran out of water, the people started saying, so where are we going to find water to drink? We saw this last week, and God provided sweet water from a pool of water that was at first undrinkable. God made it sweet. So God showed in many ways already in the book of Exodus, he's shown many wonderful, brilliant examples of his love, his care, and his reliability. I will take care of my people. I will take care of you. And here, now in chapter 16, we read that it's 2.5 months later after they have come out of Egypt. So not a lot of time has passed yet. So the examples of what God has done is still pretty vivid in their imaginations and in their memories. It's only 2.5 months later, but their food supply is running out. They're traveling, so to carry 2.5 months of food is quite a bit, actually. So it's to be expected that their food is running out by now. And they're starting to get hungry, and they're starting to get worried. At Marah, which is only 3 days after the Red Sea, at Marah, we saw this last week, at Marah they began to panic when they didn't have water. But here, in our passage, they act much worse. Their behavior is terrible. They said, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you, Moses, you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So they're not just grumbling, they are in open revolt, and they are rejecting God. They do not believe that God is going to take care of them. They said, why did you bring us out here? Did you do it just to kill us? Because their words suggest that that's what they expect is going to be the result, because they're hungry. And so Israel's faith hasn't grown very much at all. It's a question whether they have any faith. But parents, when their children act really badly, parents don't reject their children. They don't expel them from the family. They work harder to win the hearts of their children and to teach them to be more faithful and better behaved. And that's what God does too. God doesn't just reject his people. He could have, but he becomes more, he's just patient with his people. And he says to them in verse 4, behold, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you. And in verse 12, he says, in the morning you shall be filled with bread. And the next morning, the Israelites woke up and they looked out and they saw all this white. It looked like frosting? It looked like frost on the ground. And they said, what is this? And Moses said, it's the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. And of course, God knows Israel's needs. He is their creator. He knows how humans work, that we need food, we need drink, we need various things, and God understands these things, and he provides for these things. He knows Israel needs food, so he provides food for them. Verse 4 calls it bread from heaven. Psalm 78 that we sang from called it the bread of angels. They ate the bread of angels. What the angels are eating in heaven, that's what Israel ate in the wilderness. That's kind of the image that is given. God provides food for their stomach. You know, it's really amazing. Just that God provides food for our stomachs is really beautiful, is really quite awesome. One of the things that I really enjoy, I don't do it very often, one of the things I really enjoy, in some ways I'm a very simple person. One of the things I really enjoy is I like going shopping with my wife at the grocery store. I like the cookie aisle, of course, but my favorite part of the grocery store is fresh produce. It's just a really beautiful part of a grocery store, to see the fruits and the vegetables and the meat and the eggs and so on, and the milk. And it's just awesome to me. So you can go there and you can buy whatever you need and you can eat it. Food in its natural state, like fresh produce, food in its natural state is beautiful. It's also delicious, and remarkably, it's also extremely nutritious. Eat your vegetables. Eat your fruit. We're supposed to eat these things. They're really good for you. It is a miracle that we can eat. I think that every Christian should plant a vegetable garden. It's something I don't have right now, but I've always had a vegetable garden in the past. Vegetable garden helps you to discover something of the miracle of food. You put a little piece of organic material, a seed in the soil. You put a seed in the dirt. And you make sure it has warmth, sunshine, and moisture. and the seed begins to open up, and a green tendril comes up, and a plant begins to grow, and it becomes a bush, and it produces flowers. And the flowers become fruit or vegetables. And you wait long enough, and they become ripe, and you can eat it. Out of the soil comes this delicious, beautiful, nutritious fruits and vegetables. It's a miracle that food can spring up from the soil. How much more wonderful is the bread from heaven, the bread of angels, this miracle of provision, this beautiful, delicious, abundant, nutritious food which just appears every morning on the ground. Manna from heaven. God provided food for their stomachs. He did it brilliantly, lavishly, and continuously. We read that everybody gathered together about an omer. And unhelpfully, it says an omer is a 10th part of an ephah. It doesn't help very much. So I've discovered that an omer is about 2 liters. Every person gathered together about 2 liters of manna. That's how much they would need in order to eat to start the day, to get themselves going until the evening. And so every person, there's enough manna that fell every night for every person to have 2 liters of manna. And later on in the book of Numbers, we get census, so the people are counted, and we learn that there's about 1 million people, maybe 2 million people. Like, it's an incredibly large number of people that are traveling through the wilderness. About 2 million. Isn't that about the size of Hamilton? No? I forget. I should have looked it up. Anyways, it's a tremendously large number of people, and God, every morning, He had 2 liters of manna on the ground for every person so that they could have enough to eat. And God did it for 40 years until they reached the border of the land of Canaan. So when you think about it, God is providing food for their bodies, but He's doing it beautifully. He's doing it wonderfully. He's doing it abundantly. So it is, at the same time, it is a message from God in which He says, I hear your complaints. I hear that you're almost at open revolt, but I love you. And here's food for you. I'm taking care of you. And so God has meant it when they said, what is it? It is food for their stomachs. It's also a message from God in which God says, I love you. I'm taking care of you. And it's my pleasure to provide for you. But it's more than these 2 things. It is bread for the stomach, and it's a message of God's love, which is really important. But it's also a promise that God's going to give something better. He's going to give bread which is better than that. And that's part of the whole manna experience. It's an essential part of the manna experience. When they say, what is it? It is very clearly, God is very direct and deliberate in stating to His people, it is the promise of something better in the future. In verse 29, we read, see, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, He gives you bread for 2 days. The Lord has given you the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a gift from God. The Sabbath is the gift of rest. And the gift of rest is a beautiful thing. Israel is working hard. They're traveling through the wilderness. Every day they get up, they pack up their camp, and they they put on their burdens, they shoulder their packs, in whatever way they're transporting things, they have to travel for a full day. And at night they set up their camps again, and it's hard work. And God says, I know you're working hard, and I'm giving you a rest. The Lord is giving you a Sabbath. Every week, every seventh day is a day of rest. Now, I can tell you that getting a rest is a really nice thing. Last Sunday, I was back for the first day after having a break for 3 weeks. I love my holidays. I love my work. I love you, but I love a break. And I think everybody understands that. I think everybody feels similarly. We love to take a break. We love to do something different. That's not, you have to do this, but you can choose to do what you want in that day. And God says, I'm giving you a rest. I'm giving you a break. Every Sabbath is a beautiful gift from God. And God said, so in order that you can enjoy this break, on the Friday, you're going to get twice as much manna on the ground so that you don't have to gather manna on the Sabbath. You know, in the Old Testament, the Sabbath is a Saturday. So Israel was a forward-oriented, a future-oriented life. So in the Old Testament, you worked Sunday, Monday, right through to Friday. You worked hard for 6 days, and then you got a rest at the end. And so you're working toward the end when you get your rest. So you're a future-focused community. They're living for the future. And that was completely suitable because they were living for what was coming. They were living for the promised land. They were traveling through the wilderness to the future. And so the whole Old Testament time was a time when they looked forward to the future, especially in the book of Exodus. But when they got to the promised land, it remained this orientation. It remained that you worked for 6 days and then you took your rest at the end. It remained still looking forward because in the promised land, although they no longer received manna, they received abundant riches and food because they could farm the land. It was a land which God described as flowing with milk and honey. Imagine streams and rivers flowing with milk, and the waterfalls in Hamilton going over the escarpment. Imagine waterfalls of honey. Hard to imagine, but that's how God described it. It wasn't actually that, but it was so rich that that was an image which God used to describe how rich the land was. So when they came to the promised land, things became better. They had all the water they needed. They had abundant food. They became very prosperous. And yet people died. They left Egypt and they received beautiful things. They were liberated from slavery. They were liberated from their enemy. But they still had problems. And above all, they still were struggling with the problem of death. So they were not experiencing complete satisfaction of their needs yet. And so the whole Old Testament remained a forward, a future, a hope for the future. And then Jesus came. Jesus changes everything. Jesus came and he said, I am the bread which comes down out of heaven. And if you eat this bread, you will live forever. And the bread which I give for the life of the world is my flesh. And if I eat it, I will live forever. I will escape not just Pharaoh and slavery, but I will escape Satan and death. And then Jesus died on the cross, and he rose from the dead. And his resurrection from the dead makes all the difference, because that's what Israel was longing for. To receive Jesus so that they could overcome the fear of death. And now that Jesus Christ has come, we no longer are looking for that future. We are living out of the past. We no longer live for the end of the week, but we live out of the beginning of the week. Our rest is no longer on the Saturday, but our day of rest is on the Sunday, the first day of the week. Our week begins with a celebration of victory and life. We already have life in Jesus if we believe in him. He satisfies every need and desire that we could possibly have. So that when I receive Jesus, when I eat his flesh and drink his blood, which is simply symbolic expressions, which means when I believe in him and when I take him in, and when I eat the Lord's Supper and in faith receive Jesus, and when I sit in church and I listen to the sermon and I accept and I believe that I'm eating his flesh and drinking his blood, I'm taking Jesus in, I'm being satisfied with the manna which comes down from heaven, which is Jesus Christ. And when we are satisfied by Jesus, Satan can no longer touch us. If you are completely satisfied, temptation dies. And you know that's true. If you go to a wedding feast, if you go to a wedding party, and you sit down and you eat, and you eat, and you eat some more, and you've eaten dessert, and you're filled to bursting. Sometimes that happens. I'm not sure if that's really the right thing to do. There is such a thing as gluttony. But when you've eaten a lot, when you've had a feast, you don't go home and eat some more. Your hunger no longer matters to you. You're completely satisfied. When you are completely satisfied in every respect, when I eat Jesus, when I take him in, when I believe in him, he satisfies me completely. That's the way it should be. And when we are completely satisfied, Satan can't touch us. Satan can't tempt us. He can't lure us to say, here, find satisfaction in this other thing, this other sinful pursuit. Because we're filled with Jesus. And so the great future has come. And we're living out of what Jesus has accomplished. We are filled with him on Sunday with a celebration of his victory, of his life. And we are filled with him so that we may enter into this new week celebrating that life and continuing to live out of Christ Jesus. This is being satisfied with the bread from heaven, Jesus Christ, is so important that Jesus wanted to say it as bluntly, almost brutally as possible. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Israel survived in the wilderness by eating bread from heaven. They did that for 40 years. They didn't plant food in gardens. They didn't have the opportunity, but God provided. He gave them bread from heaven. We survive as well. We survive by eating bread from heaven, Jesus Christ. Eat him deeply, wonderfully. Go to church and take the message in, receive the gospel, and be satisfied. And you will never seek satisfaction elsewhere. Amen.
Amen.